Kendra decided she was going to do an experiment. It had been a couple of weeks. I'd been getting some strange stomach aches, and we didn't know why. And then one day we got an email from a Homesteady fan who said, "Hey Aust, loved your recent Abducted podcast. If you haven't heard the Abducted podcast, that's the term we use to describe the crazy people who decide to bring ducks into their life. They said, I am abducted, but I've learned since becoming abducted that I'm allergic to duck eggs. They give me wicked stomach aches, and they told us the process and how they figured this out. Well, here I was having these crazy stomach aches, and we had no idea why. And at the same time, we were enjoying farm fresh duck eggs every morning. So one morning, we were getting ready to go out as a family and spend the day out. It takes a lot of work to get two adults and a whole mess of children ready to go. We'd all gone out. Kay prepared breakfast, and without telling me, she made duck eggs. We already had the suspicion that they might be the culprit, but she decided to try it out without me knowing. For science, you need to have a blind study, a blind test, and this was our blind, without me knowing, eating duck eggs. And sure enough, about an hour and a half into our day, out and about with the family, on came the stomach ache. Her hypothesis was confirmed, and my stomach was very angry. I'm allergic to duck eggs, and since finding this out, we have shrunk our duck herd flock, that's the word. We have shrunk the duck flock to just two. We have two figureheads, Don Draker and Betty Draker. As you know, if you're abducted, you have to have cheesy duck names for your ducks. That's one of the three main criteria. The individual we're going to talk to tonight shares this similar problem, and yet he hasn't gotten rid of the ducks. If anything, he's gotten more. We're going to welcome Morgan Gold onto the Homesteady show tonight. Morgan from the Goldshaw Farm, and perhaps you've seen Morgan's YouTube channel. He has a whole mess of ducks and a whole bunch of other stuff in his farm in Vermont. And we're going to talk ducks, allergies, leaving corporate life to start a farm, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So Morgan, I have to ask you, because I remember that day very well, like it was yesterday. What was it like the day you realized you were allergic to duck eggs?
Well, it was much like what you just described, where it wasn't like an immediate, like, oh, I know it right away. It was, we had our first ducks laying eggs, and like it was like day 2 or day 3 of getting eggs, and you're so excited, like you've had these birds for several months, you've been waiting for them to produce something, and they haven't done anything yet. And then finally, like you get that first egg and you're so excited, you fry it up, you eat it plain, you're so excited, it's great. But then what would happen is it was like I got food poisoning later that day. And I didn't know what it was, but I didn't chalk it up to the egg. I was like, well, maybe I must have had something bad the night before, or, I had some sausage with it. Maybe that was bad, or like, I had eaten something wrong. Then, 2 or 3 days later, you do it again and you get food poisoning again. You start to get this sinking suspicion. And then exactly what you described, where it's like, you kind of have a hunch, but something in the back of your mind is telling you, please don't let it be this. Please don't let it be this.
Please don't let it be the thing I've dedicated my life to, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, my whole farm business plan is all around owning a whole bunch of ducks here. This is like, I'm banking on it. Let me eat the stuff I'm raising. And so I waited until a day where I didn't have to go into work, and I knew like I could be incapacitated if such was the case. And I didn't have anything the night before. I skipped dinner. So I was like completely fasted. I had breakfast that morning. It was 2 fried duck eggs, nothing on it, and just, a little olive oil to fry it in. That was it. And I got sick again. And I was like, all right, that's the case. And so, yeah, I'm allergic to duck eggs.
That's the exact way we figured out. We never went and did any testing, and we never went to any doctors. It's pretty easy to figure out after 3 or 4 times of having food poisoning. It essentially is food poisoning. You were poisoned by the food that you work so hard to raise and produce on your homestead. Sad feeling. I know, like, oh man, what a bad day. But probably sadder because Morgan, you tell us a bit about your farm here. You're really invested in ducks.
Sure. So, I mean, we're primarily a duck and goose farm. We raise ducks for, basically selling hatchlings as well as meat and eggs, and actually hatching eggs as well. And so that's a core part of our business plan for the farm. And so to, not be able to eat at least a portion of what you're producing is frustrating. And even with the geese, I actually just started to have geese start laying eggs right now. And I'm not sure if I can do it or not, but I haven't tempted fate just yet on that one. But yeah, we're a duck and goose farm. That's mostly what we do. Waterfowl.
Those of you who are joining us live, make sure to let me know in the chat box that you can hear me, that you can hear Morgan, that it all looks good, that it all sounds good. We have a really nice show planned. Morgan has done something that's really incredible. He left the comfortable corporate life. He had a good job, a successful job, one that, when you're leaving school, you hope to get. And he left it all to start a farm up in Vermont. He left city life. For those of you who are thinking about doing this, we're going to talk a lot about that. So just let us know if you can hear me, if you can see me, and get your questions in early, because as I always say, there's a bit of a delay. And at the end of the show, we might shut it down, not getting your question in time. So get the questions in the chat box for Morgan.
Well, I never wanted to be in marketing in the first place. So I think that's a big part of it. When I went to school, I went to art school. I was like an animation major in college.
No way. Cool.
But when when I got out of school, it was right after the .com bust, and jobs were hard to come by, and I ended up finding my place at an advertising agency and working there for a little bit, and then that agency went out of business, and I got a job at an insurance company, and that job at an insurance company ultimately led to a job at an investment company, and all of it doing marketing, taking, the storytelling skills and some of the basics of design principles that I learned and developed as an animator, but applying it to strategy and how you talk about stuff. It was a certain point about, I don't know, I guess it was about 6 years ago now, where I just realized that this isn't how I want to spend the rest of my life. I mean, I was mid 30s at the time, and really thinking about, well, where do I want to go long term? And the other thing that I've sort of simultaneously gotten really passionate about is thinking about the food system that we have in America, and thinking about some of the challenges that we have in getting good, nutritious food to people. That's where my wife and I started to hatch this plan where we were going to escape our lives in Washington, D.C. and move up to this farm here in Vermont. It was relatively affordable to be up here. We're in the Northeast Kingdom, which is like the northeastern portion of the state. So it's relatively sparsely populated. Land prices are a lot cheaper. But then also at the same time, a lot of the people in this area were sort of like-minded with us. And so that was attractive to us. And so we found that place first. And then from there, we started to, we found this abandoned farm. It's an old farmhouse that was built in the 1830s. We worked on rehabbing the house and kind of going back and forth from DC to here, working on the house, trying to get that situated. Then, we had to figure out jobs because, we didn't have like the money saved up to just be like, all right, we're retired now at this point. And so my wife actually went back to school. She was a nurse and decided she wanted to be a nurse practitioner. And luckily, rural medicine is one of those real big gaps. And there's just not enough people to provide care for people in this area. And so it was matching a real passion of hers with a need in the community. And then I also just started working and looking for ways that I could leverage some of my skills from past jobs in a day job, and ultimately found some connections that would work out. And so we had this transition where we sold our house in DC, moved everything up here. I stayed in like a little tiny squat apartment for a bit to finish out my last job, and then ultimately made the leap. And it was May of 2018 when we finally moved up here full time, both of us, and started working, and actually then also started the process of starting the farm.
Hold that thought, Morgan. We are really excited to hear more about Morgan's story. He's going to tell us why he's switching from ducks to geese. But before we learn that, it's time for something special. Hear that? You know what it's time for.
Oh, I heard the birds chirping. I thought it's like, it's springtime.
No, it's time for the Camel Train shout out of the day. And look who's here to say hi for our Camel Train. They know the sound. So today's Camel Train shout out, what is the Camel Train shout out?
That's the Camel Train members.
I always have to do this part.
Yes.
Today's Camel Train member is
Caitlin Galbraith. Caitlin calls herself a military brat who's now moved from West Virginia to Maine to learn about stone restoration masonry in school, which
That's pretty cool.
That's cool. I'm sure there's a lot of need for that in Maine. There's a lot of stone walls. There was in Connecticut, a ton of stone walls and stuff like that.
And they needed restored. They'd all
And Rhode Island, remember that one?
On our old homestead, you would walk through the woods, big tall trees everywhere, and there would be these old stone walls, which used to be the farm field borders, because the farmers would plow up. I'm sure Caitlin knows all this. You probably learned at day one at masonry and stone restoration school. Caitlin does not have a homestead yet, but she is preparing for one.
Her favorite farm animal is a chicken, so that'll be a great way to get started, Caitlin, and is our son's favorite. So
oh yeah, he
you
would
got
approve.
Got a friend there.
Caitlin has the goal of being self-sufficient through, I love this, not only farming but also hunting and fishing. You can follow Caitlin on Facebook. We'll have her name spelled in the description below, so you can find her on Facebook and follow her adventures as she someday starts a homestead.
And your shirt will be coming to you soon, Caitlin.
Yeah, so watch for your Camel Train shirt. You will be the number 3 gold camel on the shirt because you joined the Camel Train at number 3. Big news, the Camel Train is halfway sold out. There are 100 Camel Train spots, 50 are gone in the first weekend. So if you're thinking about joining the train, don't wait. The train waits for nobody.
I can say how one thing I like about this program.
You like something about my program?
I do. I like something about your program. What I like about the Camel Train is that it gives you a lifetime membership for $150. A year-long membership is $50. So this gives you pay for what's essentially 3 years of membership, but you get it indefinitely.
Yeah.
It's a good deal, and I like good deals.
And
so.
we have had pioneers who've been pioneers for as long as the program's been around, which is 5 years now. So people are in it for the long haul.
So we're on about 160 acres here. You know, in terms of land and space, we got way more than we need. It's currently about 50 acres-ish or so of pasture, with the remainder being mixture of softwoods and hardwood forest. I knew that regardless of what we were going to do, what animals we were going to ultimately raise, and where our farm businesses were going to go, I knew that having perennial tree crops was going to be an important part of it. And so that's why I said, you know, first and foremost, I want trees. And then whether I'm bringing in sheep or goats or cattle or pigs or poultry, I want to add those things on. And so I got started with planting about 600 trees. It was a mixture of chestnuts, hazelnuts, elderberry, mulberry, black locust for timber, butternut. And so we had that scattered throughout the back forest because I knew that was going to take a decade just to develop that first and foremost. So that was step one. So then the next thing that we did was ducks. And so I started with, I knew I wanted to do poultry, but when I was thinking about it from a business perspective, I also realized that everybody in this area has backyard chickens. And on top of it all, if you wanted to buy a carton of a dozen eggs from one of those backyard chicken flocks, you're talking like $2 or $3 a dozen. And that's a really, real low price point and a really hard thing to actually make profitable. But meanwhile, duck eggs are relatively scarce around here.
Have you been talking to accountant Mike? You sound like you're pretty switched on there, Morgan.
He is a very smart man, as I've heard many times on your podcast. So yeah, it's really trying to have a strategy. I mean, it was the same thing with what tree crops I picked too.
That is, you just did like a mini masterclass right there on like marketing 101. If you go into the market and you say like, well, I'm going to do chickens and I'll do them cheaper or I'll do them better, you're going to be fighting, and it's probably not going to pay out unless you're like a cute little guy like my son when he started. Now he's like a manly guy, but he started off cute and little.
I'll often give people, especially in the area here, free duck eggs to get them hooked. And then once they get into it and they see, oh, wow, this does help me bake something better, or these are tasty and they make a great omelet, that's what keeps them coming back. And so not being so afraid of giving away a sample version of like, hey, let me cut this egg carton in half and give you a half dozen so you can see what it's like. That has helped a lot too, especially in this area where, it's, relatively less affluent than say a market like Boston or Montreal for us in our area. And so that's been a big part of it as well.
Morgan's like a duck pusher man over here. Hey,
exactly. Just got to get them hooked, man.
Some duck eggs. So you found a good market. You had a good idea. You were also still reasonable. So how did you get started with the ducks? How many did you bring in, and like, how did you build it?
My first year was I did 40 ducks. And basically my plan was always to try to rotationally graze them out in our pasture and ultimately try to graze them around our trees in our permaculture orchard that we have planted. I got a brooder system set up to brood those ducks for the first few weeks of their life. And then from there, I actually built a good old John Siskovich chicken tractor, and I would house the ducks in the chicken tractor, and I would move the tractor every day. And I also had some Premier One poultry netting that I'd surround it with. And so it became pretty easy from a work standpoint to have that system in place, because it was like half hour in the morning, half hour in the afternoon, just making sure I had water out to them and food and, moving the tractor. And it was really relatively low stress. And then by the time the fall rolled around, I had full grown ducks and I could separate my drakes from my hens. And I kept a couple of drakes just for future generations, but then took the rest of them, butchered them, and ultimately sold most of them, which the selling of those drakes actually made the whole enterprise break even in that first year.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Just because, when you look at like the relatively low amount of cost I had in infrastructure to begin with, that helped. But then, you have this premium meat product that you can sell too, that people weren't finding, oh, wow, farm raised duck that's raised locally here. That was also a rarity. And so that helped in terms of keeping it going. And then everything I started to do once the ducks started laying and selling there became just an easy thing to recoup the cost on, because all I was having to do at that point was keep pace with my feed costs.
Morgan, man, you're a good businessman. You've taught like so many things you've said. I want to like dive into. We could have like an 8-hour podcast here. There were two things there you talked about. First off, the getting into a enterprise where you come in lean. One of the best things about my buddy Johnny, his chicken tractors, is they are lean as far as they're great performing product. They work really well, but they are low cost compared to like a coop. So you can spend $200. I think Johnny says he spends about $250 to put together his chicken tractors, versus if you buy a pre-made coop or a shed, you can just spend $400 to $1,000.
I found it cost me about $275 to build each tractor. And it's really flexible because I can use it to raise geese. I can use it to raise ducks. I can use it to raise chickens. I could probably house other animals in it if I wanted to. I've also found, they're not that hard to build. Like, I'm a guy who, even as recently as like 4 or 5 years ago, was like paying people to build my IKEA furniture for me. Right?
Oh man, Morgan.
And so I had like no skills.
Man.
Yeah, I had no skills whatsoever. But just following along in John's manual there, and you put it together pretty quick, and you find you just get some skills along the way, which is, I think, another fringe benefit of it all.
So for those of you watching, if you're getting sold on a Siskovich tractor, don't forget, if you're a Pioneer, we have a discount to Johnny's book in the discount section. So go ahead and check that out. I've never built one of Johnny's tractors. I've seen him a million times because we were buddies and I'd always go visit. And I knew they were. I built one. I built the Homesteady chicken tractor, and my wife always was like, can't you make me one of John's? They are so much better. She wanted John's tractor. So one of these days I'm going to do one. We got the big field out here, and I thought, man, that'd be pretty perfect. I could drag a couple across that field and actually put them to work. You mentioned, Morgan, that now you're housing geese. How did you go from the ducks to adding in geese? Why?
So sure. So I really love ducks as animals. They're they got a ton of personality. Their eggs are great. The meat is great. I just think they're great animals to work with. They're very easy to manage. But the one thing I don't like about ducks is that they're not that sustainable. Even if I'm in the peak of summer and they're getting a lot of insects from the pasture and eating plants from the pasture, there's still a fair amount of feed that I'm trucking onto the farm and providing to them. So it's feed that's grown far away from us here. I'm having to go pick it up and drive it over here. From a carbon footprint and sustainability perspective, it's not great. Geese, on the other hand, once I get past about week 4 or 5, I can have them getting about 90 to 95% of their diet from grass.
No
And
way.
here at our farm, we have just a massive supply of grass where there's no shortage there. And so I started last year raising geese in essentially a rotational grazing system, much like you do sheep or cattle. And it worked out awesome. And so I'm actually like tripling down on it for 2020 when I'm going into it.
When you look forward now, right? So you've got your ducks, you've got your geese. What is your next 3 years? We already talked about a little ways you're looking into the prosciutto and making some changes. Being allergic to the duck eggs, is this affecting you going forward? What's your plans for moving Goldshaw Farm forward?
Sure. So it's funny. I took like the first vacation that my wife and I went on in like 5 years last week, and we went out to Spain. And I was really there though, like covertly also taking lots of notes, looking at how they raise the pigs that they use to create jamon iberico, which is the special pork raised on acorns. And it's got me thinking about how do I apply a system like that to what we're doing here. And so ultimately in the next 3 years, my goal is to add 2 more animals into the mix, probably one being pigs and potentially the other being cattle, just because we're so well suited for it, given the grasslands that we have here. And really trying to build out our silvopasture, so the combination of trees and grassland, and have multiple types of animals, including focusing on the ducks, the geese, and like I said, pigs, and like I said, probably cattle, maybe sheep. I'm not 100% on that part of it yet, but that creating this system of multi-species working the land and taking advantage of the perennial tree crops that we have planted. That's my long-term vision, and so that's what I'm ultimately working towards with the farm itself.
Now, Morgan, you've got a million good ideas here. And
I feel like you're going to sound like my wife here in a minute.
Uh-oh. I got one of those too. This whole time you've been doing this, has accountant Mike, would he come and give the thumbs up? You've been profitable this whole time. You're raking in the dough. This is all working. How's this happened over the last few years? How are you making this dream work?
Sure. So there's a couple of factors. I think I would get a thumbs up from accountant Mike. But let me lay it out the facts, and you tell me. You can channel them. First off, when it comes down to it, I am not relying on farming right now to support my wife and me. So we both work off-farm jobs as our primary source of income, as our primary source of retirement savings, as our primary source of healthcare. Like all of those things are funded by off-farm jobs. And so that in and of itself, while it takes a lot of time away from being able to work on the farm, it also takes a lot of pressure away from making the farm successful immediately. I feel like I see a lot of people go into farming where it's like their paycheck is on the line with the farm that they're raising in years 1, 2, and 3, when what they should be focusing on is learning. And so I took that part out of the equation for us. Number two, when it comes down to it, and I look at my operation, like I said, year 1, I was just break even. I think I netted $23.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. It's not great. It's not paying any bills, but look, you could maybe get a pizza.
That's a good pizza. You earned it.
And year 2, so 2019, as I just actually finished doing all my stuff for my taxes, we ended up netting about $560 from the farm operations. But then on top of that, we actually made a fair amount of money from YouTube itself. But again, it's not livable income just yet for us. What I'm going to be trying to do in year 3 is ramp that up and scale that up and have sort of a more robust and more scalable enterprise that I could ultimately make as a full-time income, which I'd be hoping to do by, say, years 4 or 5. But again, not having to make this my primary right out of the gate takes a lot of pressure and gives me the ability to experiment and refine my business model before I sink a ton of money into it, or really put like our house on the line to make it all successful.
That is like great advice. Honest, like you're gonna don't quit your day job, right? You're gonna have to do something to make it work, and there are ways to make it work better. I think you guys have been really smart in taking as much time as you did to grow. The fact that you just stuck with one livestock and then you added on one very similar livestock helps. Once you throw the pigs in there, it's going to be a whole new thing, but you are planning on growing the profits. And eventually, do you actually plan on one of you or both of you cutting ties with corporate life completely and doing the whole farm thing full time?
Yeah, no, I really do. I'm hoping in a couple of years, and I don't want to kind of call my shot just yet, but that is my longer term dream, is to just be able to do this on the day in and day out and be working at a scale where that could sustain us.
Morgan, I pride myself in being pretty clever with my homesteading puns and my homesteading references. And I love my abducted t-shirts. But man, when I saw your thing, I was like, dang it, he's got me. What do people got to go to your channel to check out?
Oh, so every morning when I let the ducks out, I always give a hearty yell of "Release the Quackin'."
So good.
I gotta just admit though, I don't think I came up with it. I think I heard somebody else say it years ago. I just was consistent with it.
There you go. Hey, tell people about where do they find Release the Quackin'? What do they look for? Where do they search? Where do they follow you guys?
Yeah, sure. So, if you want to learn more about what we're doing at Goldshaw Farm, check out our YouTube channel. It's definitely the best place to do it. I put out usually 2 videos a week every Monday and Thursday, which just tell a different story about what we're going through to start the farm. And then the other thing I do is a podcast where I really try to just sit down and talk to different people, whether they're working with homesteading or farming or just kind of chasing their dreams in some sort of related field, and try to get their story. And so it's just like a conversational podcast called the Goldshaw Farm Podcast that you can find pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts.
All the things. Check out all the things. Morgan, this has been an awesome interview. So many good points, and I think I want to have the Morgan Report 2021. How did cured goose and goose prosciutto and goose bologna? Tell us all about it. We'll have you back on the show next winter to talk and see how the year went.
I'd love to do that. Yeah, that'd be fun.
The Homesteady Pioneers have the extended version of this podcast where Morgan went in to talk in detail about how to install hundreds of trees for a fraction of the cost on your property. 600 trees. That sounds very cost prohibitive.
Yeah, it wasn't. I think our overall budget ultimately worked out to be about $1,500 to put all those in.
Wow. He explained how to sell duck eggs to people who've been buying chicken eggs their whole life.
When it comes to duck eggs specifically, it's recognizing a couple of things. Number one,
and he talked about why he's trying now to convert his customers to buying geese instead of turkey. All right, I gotta hear your pitch, man. What's your goose pitch? How do you convert somebody from a turkey purchase to a goose?
So
he had me totally convinced. I'm like totally regretting I just ordered 5 turkeys this year, and I'm like, dang it, now I should have got goose. If you want to hear the extended version of this podcast and all our podcast episodes, become a Homesteady Pioneer. You can become a pioneer for as little as $5 a month. You can join us live for these interviews, access the library of all our extended versions, and get discounts on products like John Siskovich's chicken tractor plans, which we talked about in this episode. Click here to become a Homesteady Pioneer.